If you're a good organization with good people and a great culture, and you have a skilled sales force, oftentimes you can overcome a little bit of product deficiency.
He managed $235 billion in assets. He led teams of over 1,200 people, and he reached the C-suite of 3 Fortune 500 companies. But his real breakthrough came when he stopped trying to be perfect and started being real. Welcome back to The Root of All Success. I am the real Jason Duncan, speaking of being real. And this is episode 326. And my guest today is Scott Ramey, authentic sales expert, former Fortune 500 C-suite executive, and founder of the Ramey Group. He spent over 30 years in corporate America, holding executive vice president roles at Transamerica, Nationwide, and Corebridge Financial. But the billions in sales and massive teams that he led tell only part of the story. He built the Ramey Method and the Resonance Edge, which we're going to talk about, these frameworks that challenge everything we think we know about sales by putting authenticity, vulnerability, and genuine human connection at the center. From becoming the first Division I athlete in a small Indiana high school to battling anxiety while leading at the highest levels, Scott's journey is more than just climbing a ladder. It's about changing the game entirely. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Such a pleasure to be here with you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you too. And I know that the listeners don't care, but it is kind of funny for you and me. We've attempted to record this episode about 1,400 times today because we're proud to use Riverside as our recording platform. But today they've had a Wednesday. Let's just call it that. They've had a Wednesday. But let's just get into it, Scott. You climbed the C-suite ladder, managing hundreds of billions in assets, but your entire methodology is built on vulnerability and authenticity, which are two words that are not exactly synonymous with corporate boardrooms. So when did you realize that being real wasn't a weakness, but was your greatest competitive advantage?
Yeah, no, I love this question, and it's I would say it's still an evolution. It's a work in progress. I had my first panic attack when I was 19. And so most of my career, particularly early in my career, I felt like I was anxious, certainly, but it probably wasn't until last year, honestly, Jason, that I figured out that it really, the energy that I was feeling wasn't necessarily me. It was the rooms I found myself in. And so I knew perhaps intuitively that was happening, but like finally through some deep work and self-discovery and therapy and all these really wonderful things that I've been through, I figured out that it wasn't anxiety necessarily, that I'm an empath. So my empathy has been my greatest strength. Probably learned it from my grandmother and my mother. They were really empathetic people. You mentioned small town Indiana. But I used it to my advantage because I felt like that would differentiate me from virtually everyone else that I was seeing leading and running organizations. And I wanted to create an environment that was safe and secure. We talk a lot today about psychological safety. I was trying to do that a long time ago. And so I just really leaned into understanding who my team was. The journey especially for me continues. I still haven't quite figured it out. I still wear a mask a lot, and I do my darndest not to wear it because it just isn't necessarily who I want to be. But exiting corporate has led me down a really beautiful path, and I'm super grateful for my corporate experience, but I'm even more grateful for the work that I've done since I left corporate.
So you were the first D1 athlete from your small Indiana high school. Side question, what sport was it? I don't think I know
Basketball.
the sport.
Basketball. I played all sports growing up. It was that sport was basketball that got me to Niagara University, the Purple Eagles.
Go Purple Eagles. So what did breaking that barrier of being that first D1 athlete from your whole high school history, what did breaking that barrier teach you about defying limits? And how did that mindset show up when you entered the business world?
So the athletic mindset I had was always one about continuous improvement, which served me really well. I mean, being an athlete, our girls are both athletes or former athletes now. They're both graduated from college in the real world. But I always focused on getting better, continuous improvement. I knew how to put the work in. Again, when you grow up in small town Indiana, literally a town of 15,000 people, you watch your family buy 2 homes on a handshake. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows your business. What I would tell you this is that what I learned was work ethic, decency, trust, team first mindset. What I underestimated And I think it ultimately led to this external pressure that I kept putting on myself, and internal pressure I put on myself. I didn't understand the burden I was carrying being the one that broke through the barrier. And it wasn't until, again, within the literally last 12 to 18 months when I started to go really deep on the work, was that having that sort of pressure, like you weren't just, I wasn't performing and for just myself, the whole team or the whole town was behind me, everybody. And candidly, I think it probably caved me in, which is why it led to my first panic attack. My panic attack came when I decided I couldn't play ball any longer. I had 5 foot breaks, fifth metatarsal, kept breaking. And I think I probably felt like I disappointed a lot of people. And then that just continued this whole thing. Like, I got to be the guy who's always performing, who's fixing things, who's breaking through, who's always outperforming the next person. And so I carried that pressure with me all the time. I think it made me super successful in my corporate career, but it also had a cost associated with it. And I missed all the signs and signals along the way. And it catches up with you. I mean, I think that's what I share with the audience, and many of the audience members listening probably have maybe some similar experiences, that if you continue to ignore the signals that you're receiving, you put undue stress and pressure on yourself time after again, it catches up with you. And it did. It caught up to me in a big way.
Now, you studied history, not business. And by the way, I'm a former American history teacher, school teacher, so I go history buffs. But how did that unconventional academic background shape the way you think about leadership and influence?
Well, when I left Niagara University, I transferred to John Carroll because I knew my basketball career was over and I wanted to go to law school. And I wanted to end up in an accredited school that really gave me a leg up. I was taught by the Jesuits, and learning history and liberal arts, not getting a liberal arts education for the Jesuits, was pretty spectacular because it really forced me to lean in, to understand, and discover. So the way I would maybe frame this up for everyone is that having that desire to go deep and research and understand, I had this drive that, now that it was no longer a sports driven drive or basketball driven drive around perfection on the court, it was like, how do I learn more? How do I go deeper? How do I understand? And so it led me down this path of really understanding what made teams tick. How could I make my team perform at a higher level? How could I help bring people along? How could I take this perceived weakness of anxiety and panic and turn it into my superpower? And so I credit a lot of my, and I don't know that this will sound weird, but a lot of my success in corporate came from what the Jesuits taught me about being inquisitive, being interested, trying to figure out what makes people tick. So it was a great experience. I was certainly disappointed I couldn't play ball any longer, but landing at a school like John Carroll with some amazing professors and people who really looked after me was really cool.
Now, I peeked around on your Instagram page, and you have at least one daughter who's a swimmer. You said you had another child who was also a D1 athlete. I didn't particularly see that one. Must have not scrolled far enough. But what sport was he or she in?
Yeah, so Aubrey and Sasha. Aubrey's our oldest. She's now in Chicago. She plays soccer, and so she played. Both of them went into the transfer portal. So I have 2 transfer portal kids. Once Aubrey started at DePaul and ended up at Valpo playing soccer, Valparaiso in northern Indiana. And then Sasha started at LSU, ended up at Boston University, and she was the swimmer.
So wow, LSU to Boston is a huge difference.
It was, yeah. I mean, it's when you make these, both of them made decisions when they were a sophomore. I mean, that was we talk about pressure to perform, to keep up. A lot of kids their peers were committing early, and when you're a sophomore in high school, it's tough to make a decision on where you should be and where you need to be. And so both of them, the transfer portals a huge success for them. And they ended up at great spots and are starting to really flourish in their next stage in life.
Well, you even in this interview, as short as it is so far, you've been very open about struggling with anxiety and confidence issues, even while in leading massive teams. So how did you manage those internal battles while you're simultaneously closing billion-dollar deals?
Well, looking back, it was so second nature to me to literally go to bed anxious, wake up anxious. And so whether it was going to present to our CEO about a new strategy or trying to win a multi-billion-dollar case, I was not without anxiousness, to say the least. But what it forced me to do, again, based upon how I was taught and how interested I was in people, is that I had to take the energy off myself. And so as a salesperson, it really worked in my favor because I hated to be asked questions. I hated to be in the spotlight. So I churned everything to the audience I was going to be in front of. And I would just, and this is part of what I teach in the Residence Edge and the program I work with in my workshops, is I teach, essentially, I'm teaching the framework that I use in every single pitch, every single story, every message. If I was taking over a new team, rolling out a new strategy, it was the work that I did behind the scenes to understand what the audience needed to hear. And everything was constructed that wasn't about me. And so I figured that out pretty early in my journey. I mean, heck, I remember sitting in my first interview with Edward Jones in St. Louis, and I was just sweating, wringing wet. And I don't know why they hired me. I guess that maybe they felt bad for me. I don't know. But they hired me and they gave me my first chance as a 22-year-old kid in the financial services industry, and I'm forever grateful for that. But I turned that again. I kept focused on how do I make this my strength? How do I make this my strength? And it was when I realized it wasn't about me, then the pressure would subside a little bit. It was still there. It would linger. It would bother me. But I used to think of it as a struggle, like again a deficiency. Like almost a curse, but now I have this context that it really was a blessing in disguise because I've focused a lot of my energy on my team members and not on me, and that turned out to be a really good thing.
In building your career and then eventually the Ramey Group, what's one time that you had to make a hard pivot? And then what did that teach you?
A hard pivot. Well, I remember very, very specifically, we were at one of the organizations I worked for. We had 68 offices across the country, and I was responsible for closing one office. Had been kind of a staple in our business, in our enterprise, and so a lot of people were impacted by that closure. As you imagine, when you're in that type of environment and there's multiple offices being closed, that the message is going to be crafted by a lot of people in the legal department, HR. Business has some input, but usually it's the guidance is given and the directive is given from the entities that want to protect the well-being of the company. And I'll never forget that moment that I was a good soldier, a good company man, and I followed the script, the messaging for the first meeting, and it went so poorly. It went so poorly. You could see and I'll never forget the feeling, the emptiness and the sadness on people's faces because what they needed to hear in that moment wasn't what I was saying. And so I had multiple meetings at this location, and after the first meeting, I said, you know what? I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to share a level of empathy that these folks needed to hear in that moment. I want to give them some hope and promise that it's not going to be the end of the world for them, and that their families are going to be in a really good spot because there were good solutions for them that we were offering up as an organization. But I vowed at that point, I'm never going to take somebody else's message. That I'm not going to try to weave spin things into a message to benefit the organization. If I do it my way, it'll benefit the organization because we'll create believers. And if we create believers, we'll build trust. And if we build trust, we'll make better connections with people, and we'll have a bigger and better impact on the people, no matter the circumstances, because sometimes the circumstances aren't going to be favorable for your team members. It just happens. Unfortunately, in business, we have to when leading groups like I led, you had to make really difficult decisions. And sometimes it impacted people negatively. But I never, ever, ever took those moments for granted because I knew at some point I would be on the other end of that conversation. And so I just wanted people to feel that I cared for them, that I knew that it was a circumstance that wasn't favorable, that I knew it wasn't ideal for them, but I'm the messenger, and I want to do it with empathy and grace and compassion and love. Dare I say love? Because that's just not a word we used in corporate America.
You created the Ramey method around authenticity, empathy, presence, and clarity. So which of those four do most sales leaders completely miss, and what does it cost them?
Well, it just depends. The thing I would say to you is that when I think of the three primary, and I'll put vulnerability and authenticity in this concept of connection. So if you have clarity, connection, and tone, all three need to be present. And vulnerability and authenticity in that connection category need to be present. You can't, if you're clear, but have misread the tone of the room and don't create connection, then you're just simply talking at people. If you have you have great command of the room and the energy, and you're trying to shift the room, but no clarity, then you're creating belief, but no direction is being taken, and so on and so forth. So all three need to be there. What I see most with my clients is they've missed the boat on clarity first and foremost, which then impacts their ability to connect and the tone. So if I help them get clear on their messaging, so regardless of circumstance, let's just take one, for example, a new rollout of a strategy, for example. If they don't understand the skepticism associated with that, and then they're crafting the message uniquely based upon what the company line needs to be, then they're going to miss the boat completely. So we tend to start with clarity, because what I've found in my career and in my research that I've done is that if we start with a really clear message, then we remove the obstacles that people often have, which is they tend to want to say too much. So we start with clarity, then it frees them up based upon what they've crafted for the messaging to be themselves, to really dial in the tone and the energy, and to work on creating connection. And so I think clarity is the most important to start with.
Now, you also have something called the resonance edge. So, what resonance is really important to you, and you've talked about that pre-show. What does that mean, and why is it important?
So it's so important to me. In fact, I've created what I call RQ, because we have IQ to measure intelligence, but we have EQ to measure emotion and how we interact with folks. But we don't have a measurement to determine how we make people feel. I mentioned, we've talked a little bit about my anxiety. As an empath, you feel energy. My gift was I could walk into a room, I could take over a new organization. I was the fix it guy. And oftentimes I was to fix it because there was scarcity, so much scarcity involved with the team. They were so fearful. And I would walk into the first meeting and I would feel that energy. So resonance to me is, how do we make people feel? And if people feel in a favorable way towards us as leaders, then if they believe in us, then we can get them to move in the direction that we want to. And so I've, again, taken this weakness or perceived weakness that I had for years and said, this is about, and by the way, it's trainable. It's trainable. And all the research points to the fact that, for instance, if our tone is off, it will ripple in 2 milliseconds. So if we're in a mindset of scarcity as a leader, our team will feel that well before we say a word. And so that's why it's so important to me. And honestly, Jason, seeing time and time and time again of really, really great really, really capable people, strong leaders, have amazing strategies, but they don't go anywhere because they can't create belief in the organization. I mean, I can go on and on about the examples, and share example after example with you. And that's perplexing, because at the end of the day, our responsibility is to get results, and we can best do that by creating belief and energy and emotion that people want to be a part of.
You've said that trust is a revenue driver. Can you give a real example of a company that lost millions because they prioritized being polished over being authentic?
Well, I dare I say, I'd be careful to say a specific company, but
we will leave the names out to protect the guilty.
I mean, there have been a lot of large financial institutions, and some I know very well, and some I've just watched from a distance, that have put a premium on selling products and services that aren't necessarily in the best interest of clients. And to me, I understand, and goes back to this. I was living in New York, working in two-world trade for a great company called Oppenheimer Funds, and during the tech boom. And we started to see a fundamental shift in the importance of driving earnings growth and shareholder value in organizations. And it was really kind of started, it was palpable. And the more I moved through leadership and moved into the C-suite, we oftentimes forget that at the end of the day, it is about building trust with our clients and building trust with our employees. And I don't know that it necessarily should be in that order. The trust should begin with our team members and our clients, with our team members first, because if our team trusts us, they're going to create a better energy and better tone for the clients, and we're going to improve trust. But there are countless examples that I don't want to
Yeah.
chew my arm
Well,
off, so to speak.
what you just said there is harkens back to something that, as an entrepreneur who started several different companies, that I've always believed, and I don't know where I learned it or who taught me or why I even thought it was important. But what you just said about we have to connect and make our employees or team members feel valuable first, then the clients or customers, in that order. And if we don't do that, you're building backwards, because if you focus only on the customer, the client, but you don't have the trust of your team, you'll have nobody to serve your clients. And I only have one fairly successful entrepreneur to admit that, but to admit that he believes the other direction. But he's the only one. He's an anomaly. He says my clients are the most important. I'll fire people and get rid of them and get somebody new. But I just don't agree with that. You seem to agree with me on this issue.
I do, and that's maybe it's certainly a mindset. It's a perspective, but it's also I've witnessed firsthand. I've witnessed firsthand that when we, as leaders and organizations, focus only on the outcome and drive shareholder value or our returns or our margins or whatever it might be, then I've seen cultures deteriorate significantly, not a little bit, a lot, because people are very aware and very astute, and they understand that if your unwillingness to invest, so a sales leader, for example, you're a sales leader, a large organization, you're focused on margins, focused on earnings growth, focused on driving shareholder value, but yet you're relatively uncompetitive. And as a sales leader, you're wearing that stress of and energy every single day. And you go into a quarterly business review or monthly business review, and you're being asked, why aren't we driving better performance? And you lay out all the reasons why, and lack of digital experience, products, services, whatever it might be. That is a really, really huge burden that to carry, number one, but it's also an energy and tone that ripples. It ripples through the entire sales organization, relationship management, operations, service. Everybody's feeling it. Everybody knows it. But if you're only concerned about shareholder value, you've created a culture that becomes very apathetic, and it just becomes, it's toxic. It just is. And again, I've experienced it multiple times.
Well, I'm going to ask you in just a minute after we get through talking about our sponsor for today's episode about lies. So we're going to talk about lying in a minute, so stay tuned. We're going to get back to Scott in just a second. But first, if you want to learn the 7 things that you have to fix before you even think about selling your business, I want you to go register right now for my live training at whattofixbeforeyouexit.com. That's whattofixbeforeyouexit.com. It's free, it's live, and it will absolutely change how you think about your company. So go register now at whattofixbeforeyouexit.com. Now, let's thank our sponsor today for sponsoring this episode. So I want to talk about taking control of your business cash flow with Bank on Yourself. Now, I want to ask you, are you ready to create your own private source of funding and transform the way you build your wealth? Well, you can do that with Bank on Yourself. Imagine a proven strategy designed for entrepreneurs that lets you access capital when you need it, without banks, without gatekeepers or tedious applications. This approach lets your money grow every year, gives you liquidity for investments or expansion, and protects your savings from market shocks. You can set your own terms for borrowing and repayment. You can maximize what you keep, and you can keep your business moving forward with confidence. I know for a fact, as a personal Bank on Yourself person, like I'm using this methodology myself. I know that savvy entrepreneurs all around the country are unlocking freedom with this method. And if you want to learn how you can bank on your own success by banking on yourself, go to therealjasonduncan.com/bank on yourself. That's therealjasonduncan.com/bank on yourself. And you can book a confidential session with a specialist on the team that I use. I use these people to do this for me, and how this strategy can help fit your financial goals. That's therealjasonduncan.com/bank on yourself, where you can take charge of your financial future today. Now back to the show. Scott, in 3 decades at companies like Transamerica and Nationwide, what's the biggest lie that companies tell themselves about what actually drives sales?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. The biggest lie, I think it's product. Probably it's product. Product is important. Don't get me wrong. It is, but I also think that it's super commoditized and it comes and goes and ebbs and flows. And if you're a good organization with good people and a great culture, um, and you have a skilled sales force, oftentimes you can overcome a little bit of product deficiency. And it's important, but it's not the only answer. I'm thinking of a client I work with. It's a really wonderful company, Fortune 300 company, and they have relatively competitive product, not the best, but boy, do they have just a beautiful culture with amazing people, and you can feel the energy and the tone and the command of the folks that are there. And so, and frankly, they should be selling more, and they're selling more because, in many instances, is ultimately why I was brought in. The belief's just not there in what they have, and so I think product is important, but it's not the only thing.
Now, you left the security of the C-suite in corporate America to start the Ramey Group. So what was the moment you knew it was time to walk away from corporate America?
You know what? It was 2.5 years ago. I remember it distinctly, and it was the first time that anybody other than my wife Michelle, which it happened to be our daughter Aubrey, when I told her about my struggle with lifelong anxiety, and the conversation was one of those moments that I needed to show up differently for her. She was struggling. She was up in Chicago, and she was struggling. She had been benched and wasn't having a great experience. And she called me in that moment. And my tendency up to that point had always been to try to fix it, give her some as good advice as I possibly could. But I knew that day that there's just something different about what she was experiencing, what I was experiencing in her voice. First of all, she had called me 5 times, and normally when she calls, or any one of my daughter's calls, I try to pick up, but I just couldn't pick up in that moment. So I knew something was a little off. And then when I picked up the phone and we finally got on together live, I knew that this is probably not an ordinary moment. And I considered in that moment, do I need to share with her that I had been struggling with anxiety, because she too was struggling with anxiety and probably a little OCD as well. So I kind of took a deep breath, like, okay, what is she going to think of me? Am I going to be viewed the same way if I share this with her? Is she going to think I'm lesser than? So I had decided to share with her that I had been struggling with it. And Jason, her response was beautiful. She paused. I thought she had hung up, but she paused and she just said, Dad, you do? And I said, yeah, kiddo, I do. I've been living with this my entire adult life. And she said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. And she went on to she bet on herself, entered the portal, transferred. She was Missouri Valley Conference in the conference tournament. She played 3 different positions in the Final Four to get their team to the NCAA tournament. They end up winning the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. And she played every single minute of the year. And she played last month on a stress fracture. And I just saw what she was willing to bet on herself. And I was just thought to myself, I've been thinking about doing this for a long, long time. I've been pulled to serve people in a different way, to start my own business. I've literally been thinking about it for almost a decade. And I'm like, she has this courage and I don't. And so that's when I knew that it was time, and opportunity presented itself. And here we are.
So this is the root of all success. So I want to ask you, what has been your one key to success throughout your career?
I think empathy for sure, and understanding how to treat people. And again, I credit that to my growing up in a small town called Crawfordsville, Indiana, and the people there are some of the closest people to this day in my life.
How do you personally define the word success?
I define it very differently today. It's freedom. Freedom. I chased financial reward, rank. Today, it's freedom. I am building and designing the life I have always wanted.
So based on that definition, do you consider yourself to be successful?
Oh, 100%.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm more successful now than I was when I was an executive vice president of a Fortune 100 company.
Man, I love it. I love to hear that. I love those transitions. There's 2 interviews today of people that left corporate America making a lot of money, going to do their own thing. And this idea of freedom is that magnet that draws us that direction. And I know the listeners can definitely echo that sentiment. So thank you, Scott, for sharing that today.
Yeah.
We got a few questions left today. These are our 3 rapid fire questions to finish out the show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
As a history major who led Fortune 500 teams, which historical leader's approach to influence or persuasion do you admire the most?
Lincoln.
Oh,
Abraham Lincoln.
Love it.
Without a doubt. 100%.
All right. Second question. You hike with your 2 labs. What's your favorite trail and what do you think about when you're out there?
Well, so I would just say my favorite hikes ever were in Switzerland 2 years ago without the dogs, with my wife, Michelle, and some dear friends. And I don't think about much of anything, in fact. And I was just, I was in awe of the beauty, and I realized how small we really are, and that there's so much more out there than we possibly can comprehend.
All right. Third and final question. If you could sit down with your 22-year-old self right before entering the corporate world, and I think you said earlier that was your interview with Edward Jones at that time. So if you could sit down with your 22-year-old self right before entering the corporate world, what's the one thing that you'd tell yourself?
Let it go. Let it go. It's really not that important. Most things, I mean, other than family, let it go. Everything else, let it go. Let it roll off your back. It's really not that important.
And what you just quoted a very famous movie song. It's like, we know, let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, congratulations on all your success, man. I really admire what you're doing and the direction that your life is going now and act 2 after corporate life. So I congratulate you on your success. If listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to DM me on LinkedIn, it's great. I'll be super reactive there. And then my website, thescottramey.com.
That's the Scott Ramey, Ramey. So go check him out. Scott, thank you once again for being on the show.
Jason, thanks for having me.
All right, you know what time it is. It's time for another edition of JD's Public Service Rants. This is where I call out the little things that shouldn't have to be said, but clearly they do. So if you're guilty of this one, well, consider yourself officially put on notice. I want to talk to you people who say no offense. If your sentence starts with no offense, but listen, just stop talking, because whatever comes next is always offensive. You're not fooling anybody. Saying no offense doesn't cancel out the rude thing that you're about to say. It's not a get out of jail free card. It's a red flag with a warning label. And in case you're offended by that, I don't care. Well, that's it for today's JD's Public Service Rant. If you've got an idea for one of these, send it over my way. And remember, don't be that guy. I want to thank Scott Ramey for being my guest on the show today. It was a pleasure talking to him about his transition out of corporate life into starting his own thing and dealing with this idea that he was an empath and empathy, but it also led to this these anxiety issues and how he came to grips with that and what it's been able to allow him to do now. So I'm grateful to be able to talk to people like Scott on the show. And thank you for listening to the show. It is very important that we have listeners or we don't really have a show. So thank you for being here, for listening, for tuning in. Make sure you tune in again next time when I talk with yet another very successful person about his or her journey to success. Until then, as always, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King.
Attention business owners. Attention business owners. Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.